Hi, I'm Alicia Abendroth, and this is Tridge Agri-insider, your Agri-Food for Thought podcast where we talk about anything and everything agri-food supply chain, brought to you by Tridge. In this heart-wrenching episode of Agri-Insider, we're joined by a special guest from Tel Aviv, where the Israel-Hamas conflict persists. Gil Horsky is founding partner of FLORA VC, an impact investment fund focused on the Israeli and European agri-food ecosystems. Gil provides firsthand insights into the emerging war and the resilience of the incredible Israeli agri-food tech community. Hi, Gil. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's such a pleasure to have you on the show with us.
Thank you so much. Amazing. Super excited to be here.
Awesome. So, today I'm first of all, I'm so excited that you were able to make it onto Agri-Insider. We had planned to speak all about kind of the VC network and generally the kind of ag tech community in Israel and kind of the projects you're working on. But I know, with the current circumstance in Israel, you're calling in from Israel. Some of that will have shifted today. I think, there's some pretty pressing and relevant topics that didn't exist in our world even 2 weeks ago that we definitely also need to mention. So we'll kind of shift the podcast a little bit to also kind of the political dynamics at play. Of course, while you're here, a true legend in the agri space, we also need to pick your brain on kind of agriculture and ag tech communities, ecosystem building out of Israel. But it all goes hand in hand, right? They're not mutually exclusive.
Everything is tied these days. No, for sure.
Amazing. So let's just start at the very kind of beginning. If you could just introduce yourself, tell us a bit about what you do, your background. I think that's a great place to start.
Sure. So I always like to say, I'm obviously originally from Israel, moved in, did the Israeli route. We all go to high school, military. We tend to travel around the world a bit. Did my undergrad in Israel and actually worked a bit in consulting, and then moved to the U.S. To do my MBA. And when I graduated, I always like to say, everybody that studied with me was, I guess, more talented and smarter than me. So everybody wanted to either go to work in McKinsey or Goldman Sachs, to be either a consultant or a banker. Nothing against these places. So if there's anybody working in them and listening to this podcast, love both companies, but looked like very boring career paths for me. And was very keen to go to an industry that is still kind of having a very long value chain with general management that has an R&D, and manufacturing and distribution and marketing. And at the same time was looking for something that is a big industry, didn't go through disruption yet, that can have a real impact. And decided the food industry looked like an interesting place. So joined the food industry, started my career in Pepsi in the US, in Chicago. I actually was also living already in the city as a student, and joined Pepsi in their healthier businesses, and really learned bottoms up in a bunch of commercial roles, kind of the industry, and had a fantastic time. Really learned what a big industry it is, what a big impact it can have. At that time, there was no food tech, there were no investors. The concept of startups in the food industry, except brands, didn't exist at all. So this whole beautiful ecosystem that we all know so well today didn't exist. Did that for around 5 years, and then had an amazing opportunity to move to Switzerland. And moved to Switzerland, joined Kraft Foods just when they bought Cadbury, was part of that acquisition. And after that, lived in Switzerland for 6 years, doing a global role for Kraft. That later on became Mondelez, and did a lot of roles around strategy, new market entry, innovation, M&A. Did a lot of work in emerging markets like China and India, but also, of course, to Europe. All out of Switzerland. It was a fantastic time. And while I was living in Switzerland, the food industry started changing. And we started having the first incubators, first VCs, first food tech startups and investors. And at that point, I knew that's going to change the industry. I knew there's a huge opportunity here to disrupt the industry. And started on a personal basis, mentoring, helping some early stage entrepreneurs. Was trying to push Mondelez to move in that direction. They were not ready yet. But in 2017, I was keen to move back to Israel after many years abroad. Moved back to Israel. And with the move to Israel, we had a leadership change and was able with a few colleagues to co-found the Mandeli Snack Futures team, which is the company's corporate venture arm and also incubation arm that incubated new businesses. Did that for a few years, was initially on the incubation side, building new businesses for the company in the health and wellness space, and then actually moved to lead our venture investments into agri-food tech companies out of Israel, but did that with a global scope. Loved every second of it. Fast forward, the beginning of this year, decided it's about time after over 15 years, even more probably, 16 years in big corporate America in the food industry. I felt like I'm ready and it's the right time to move and build my own fund, and moved forward to co-found FLORA Ventures, which we will obviously elaborate more today.
Amazing. What an incredible career. I think I heard Nestle, PepsiCo, Mandela's. I mean, these are massive multinationals, and you've seen them from the inside, which is incredible. I can only imagine that really had an impact on kind of your decision even now, or what you focus on in FLORA VC. So looking back at that point when you founded FLORA VC, what drove you? I mean, what were you seeing in the industry? And it's interesting because I think from your perspective, because it seems like you were monitoring the startup community. I mean, at its inception, you said, agriculture didn't have startups. And then suddenly it started to evolve, and now you've started a fund, working only with startups. So I guess, what drove you to start FLORA VC?
It's a great question. I think, so seeing this kind of wave, and I think the wave really of new agri-food tech companies and VC, this whole beautiful ecosystem that we know so well, I think really started evolving around 2016, 17. That was the beginning, and probably around 2000, it became kind of a really flourishing ecosystem. I always felt that the early years, I felt like it's very interesting, but I felt like still the ecosystem is still not advanced enough. So meaning there's not enough companies, the technologies are still too early. And actually in the last year, working again in the Mandeli Snack Futures team and seeing that ecosystem from that lens, I started feeling that I think we reached, in every industry, and you see this in every technology, in any industry, it looked like, if you look at the past in fintech and cyber, and I like to look at other industries as an analog to what happens in food and ag, is there's this tipping point where suddenly an investment ecosystem moves from being still a niche in something some of them never evolve, but a lot do, and they reach a tipping point that suddenly the technologies are reaching kind of the Moore law, that they become kind of scalable and efficient in a competitive price point. Regulation is supportive. You started having the right talent base and the right entrepreneurs coming in. And I felt like food and ag finally reached that point in the last year. Now, I would add another angle. I'm a contrarian. I like to think quite differently than where most folks going. And to be honest, in the last few years, until a year ago, as somebody that grew up in the industry, I couldn't justify many times the valuations of the companies. So I love agri-food tech, but it's a tough industry. And there's no quick wins. There's no shortcuts. You cannot build a company that would make $50 million revenue or ARR in 3 years. It just doesn't happen. And the company needs to be built with the right building blocks and with the right valuation and the right fundraising. And the last few years, which were so hot, and food tech became like the new shiny toy for everybody, actually, I think didn't help some of the companies. They were raising too much money and too much high valuations. And when the market collapsed in a way, I actually saw it as a fantastic time to come in. I thought the companies are going to go back to the basics. They're going to focus on revenue, on margin, on quickly reaching the market. And also valuations would be much more competitive. So that was really the tipping point that I thought that is the right time to come in. And it's interesting because obviously it's a harder time to fundraise. As a fund, we also need to fundraise. So it's a harder time. And a lot of people told me, listen, you're a lunatic. Who wants to start a fund now? This is the worst time ever. But I'm actually very confident that it's the right time to start now. And I'm seeing these systematic changes. I mean, I see the level of talent. Today, we see some of the best entrepreneurs. I'm based in Israel, and you said earlier, we have these amazing tech talents that come from the best technological military units or civilian teams. In the past, they all wanted to go to cyber, to fintech. Now they call me on a weekly basis and say, hey, I want to build a company in agri-food tech. And I asked them why. And they said, listen, because I want to build a company that has an impact in a big industry that didn't go through disruption. But a lot of times these folks have the right technological toolboxes, but they don't know the industry. They don't know which problems they're trying to solve. So that's where we try to help them. The same as with the technology. If we look at fermentation and cell-based and a lot of other technologies, I mean, a few years ago, they looked very far away from the market. Now they're slowly getting closer to market, both with the right regulatory framework and with the scale. And then we're seeing some beautiful technologies and business models coming from other industries into food. Fintech models, SaaS, AI, image recognition, generative and AI. A lot of these things are moving finally into food. And, there's this famous study from McKinsey a few years ago that talks about the 5 biggest industries, and then it ranks them by size and then by level of digitization. And agri-food tech is ranked the lowest. So meaning it's the least digitized industry. There's a lot of potential here. So I think those have been some of the reasons that have really kind of pushed me to say this is the right time to do it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, especially on the front of the valuations. I think that really resonated with me. Agriculture is traditionally, and I've had many speakers come on who've said, it's such a tough industry, such tight margins, right? And now you've got the kind of VC, startup innovation space trying to take something that's so fragile, so delicate, right? On working on such tight margins and revolutionize it. And, when you kind of think about it, it's almost like an impossible task, and it takes someone with a lot of skill set and, like you said, background, industry knowledge to actually, I think, invest properly in that industry or in the agricultural industry. So it sounds like you've really kind of tapped a niche even with your fund, working truly on projects that, I mean, maybe I should ask you this. From my perception, not a lot of VCs want to touch agriculture, actually, right? So
yeah, you're right. So we do both food and ag. So we invest across the value chain of food and agriculture. And it's interesting. You're raising an interesting point. It's, investment is also a bit of a world of hype, right? Certain things become one day super hot and the next day less, which we can all kind of sometimes laugh about. But I feel like ag tech was a bit earlier than food. There was a bit of ag tech investors. There were a bit of startups. Food became really hot in the last 5 years, a lot with alternative proteins and plant-based, etc. And it was interesting because I felt that until a year ago, food was so hot that a lot of the folks that used to do ag tech were kind of almost disappointed and saying, oh, nobody cares about agriculture. Let's start doing more food. And I have some friends in the US that are pure ag tech funds, fantastic funds that kind of started pivoting into food. But actually, the last 18 months, with a few big, actually, geopolitical events around us. I mean, if we think about it, COVID, the war in Ukraine, and actually the whole climate crisis, all of these events actually brought agriculture, I mean, the whole industry, but even more agriculture than food, to the forefront. It suddenly became a topic that, you buy. I'm actually looking here. I used to have somewhere a copy. Oh, yeah, I even made it. I still have it here, so that's good. I'm looking for it. I have this Economist from a year ago called "The Coming Food Catastrophe." That was it was written exactly, I think, when the Ukraine war started. We would never be at the front of the Economist. This would never be the hottest topic that people would talk about in a cocktail party. But suddenly, everybody talks about agriculture, and I think that actually, again, in the conversation about trends, actually, agriculture, I feel at the moment, is becoming, again, a hot topic from an investment perspective, even more than food. Again, these things could change. We as the fund do both. Our thesis is we invest in Israeli and European companies, and we want to help early stage companies. So we do pre-seed, seed, and A, and we want to help these companies scale abroad, mainly to the US and Asia. We believe that the good companies out of Israel and Europe that are need to scale globally to bigger markets. And we specifically look at companies on the value chain of food and agriculture that are either touching the world of what we call planetary health, so it could be everything related to climate, but in the lens of agri-food. So it could be regenerative agriculture, could be sustainable packaging, could be green fertilizers and green ammonia, or using waste streams and circular economy. Or the other, in addition to planetary health, it could be human health. So if we think about it, food is the number one cause of death. I mean, that, at the end of the day, food and diet, one way or another, impact almost everything around our health. So we are very interested in the topic of food as medicine, sugar reduction, personalized nutrition. So those would be kind of the two theses we look at. And specifically, and we can talk about it a bit more, we have a strong interest in agriculture. One, because Israel has and we can talk about it as we kind of move forward, Israel has a big heritage in agriculture. But the second piece is we have is a fund, and we talked about this publicly when we announced our first closing a few months ago. One of our biggest LPs and investors are the Israeli kibbutzim, and they come from agriculture. And I think, maybe I'll let you kind of ask me a few more questions, but I'm happy to elaborate for those that don't know what is a kibbutz, because that is actually a very strong link to agriculture.
Yeah, and I think it also ties into your upbringing and kind of your heritage, right? And I mean, not to segue too much, but I am kind of curious, and I do usually ask this a little earlier on. You mentioned, though, you kind of grew up in agriculture, and you grew up in you grew up in Israel, but maybe this ties into the kibbutzim kind of question as well. But is there a heritage link there? Is that all connected? I mean, yeah.
So I personally, I can't take credit. I didn't grow up in a farm, unfortunately. Maybe I wish, but so I don't have a family's history personally in the agricultural side. I do have in the food side of it. My grandparents on my mother's side actually had the first bakery in one of the large Israeli cities, but that was before I was born. So that's the strongest historical connection I can find. But as you rightfully said, is growing up in Israel as a country. I mean, Israel is a tiny country, right? It's 10 million people, very small size-wise. I mean, tiny. I believe you're sitting in Germany. I think it's like a tenth of the size of Bavaria, so it's a very small country size-wise.
Yeah.
And smaller by than almost any, if not all, the U.S. states. So it's a very small space. But actually, the interesting thing about Israel is, although the landscape and the size is so small, the landscape, you have all different landscapes in different topography from an agricultural perspective across a small space. So a third of the country is a desert, right? It's the famous Negev desert. So you have there a desert, then you have the sea. So there's a lot of agriculture around the sea. Then you have the Golan and the Galilee. The north, you have hills and mountains. And actually the kibbutz, which are basically these agricultural villages that started in Israel 100 years ago. They mainly were established by Eastern European Jewish immigrants that came. They started coming before even World War II, before the Holocaust. Some of them obviously got established later. But the concept was they came from Eastern Europe, and they were influenced by the ideas of sharing and community. They took the positive elements of socialism, and they built these beautiful villages. I'm trying not to get in trouble here politically. So they created these small villages that are anywhere between 50 to 300 families. And the concept was they work the land and everybody's equal. Everybody has the same size house. Everybody makes the same salary. It doesn't matter if they work in the kibbutz or outside. The money comes into the kibbutz and everybody gets the same salary. Kids are all living in a children's house and come on the weekends back home. Everybody eats together in a dining room. Now, these kibbutzim, there are 220 of them in Israel still today. They obviously went through a lot of change since then. That's when they started. Today, they're more privatized. But they all, or almost all of them, were working in agriculture. And they were from the desert, from the Negev to the north. And actually, they had to learn how to do agriculture in the desert. So, for example, Israel is a world leader in desert agriculture because they've been doing it for 70 years. Actually, the concept of drip irrigation that is today, there's the global biggest company in the world. It's a company called Netafim, but there's are actually inventions that came from kibbutzim. It's one of the kibbutzim in Israel that invented there. So that really built a lot of skill sets in Israel. And those were, at that time, nobody called it ag tech and startups. But in a way, that is how they worked at the beginning. They would invent something. Sometimes they would commercialize, sometimes not. but definitely Israel has its heritage in agriculture. And I think today we're going through a really interesting change that these kibbutzim understand that they want to be part of the new revolution, the ag tech revolution. That's where some of them came, almost all of them came, and joined as investors in our fund. So out of the 220, I think we have close to 200. They came as one LP, but they came not only to put money in for the financial return, they actually came for the strategic return. They basically want to be the beta site for these early stage technologies we invest in. And for us, that's amazing, because if I invest in an early stage company that is reinventing dairy farming to make it more sustainable and humane for cows, I suddenly have these 40 dairy farms I can call for due diligence, I can test the technology with. So it's a very, very unique model.
I really appreciate you highlighting that, because I mean, it's kind of like the kibbutz scene where like, hey, Gil, we've been innovating for 200 years.
Absolutely.
We need to figure out how to piggyback onto the way the world sees innovation, right? How do we get behind the kind of global buzzwords and make it all palatable for the international sphere? And I think that's where you come in, right? You say, we get it. We're going to take your innovation and our culture and our heritage, and we're going to make it approachable for the whole world, and bring some of that global, it sounds like, also in with this kind of beta site testing and bringing startups in and kind of creating almost what sounds like this really unique innovation think tank. Am I kind of on
No, first of all, you're describing it perfectly nice. It's perfectly correct and very accurately. The other thing which is really interesting, and I learned it the hard way, growing up in the large food industry, and in the last few years working in Mondelez, which my role was all external, working with startups, investing in startups, what I learned, which was really interesting, is on the one hand, and I'm a really big believer in this, and that's also what we put into FLORA, and we talked about this a few times, we probably can continue to talk about it in this conversation. The agri-food tech industry is amazing, but it's tough. And for a startup to succeed in this industry, one of the best ways to mitigate some of the risk is actually to find early on design partners, food companies or agriculture companies can be your beta site that you can learn with, you can test with, and can tell you the market needs and can help you scale. Whatever that is, it could be in R&D, it could be manufacturing, depends on which company you are on the map. But what I learned the kind of the hard way, but I'm happy I learned it because it's very beneficial for me now, is actually the large food companies or agriculture companies are super important partners for the startups. But on the other hand, they're probably not the best partners for early stage startups who are looking for their first partner. Because when you come to work with a John Deere or Syngenta or Mondelez or Pepsi, it doesn't matter where in the value chain, these companies are big. Even if they want to be really innovative, they're quite slow. They have huge internal processes. I mean, you can just have legal fighting for 6 months on the NDA and procurement. And all kind of guidelines, quality, safety, etc., all very important. That can slow down a startup. And the other thing is they want such big scale that as a startup, you at the beginning make so many things go wrong. There are always things that go wrong. You want to do all your mistakes and all these things that go wrong, you want to do them on a smaller partner, on a partner that is agile, that can accept them and thinks like you. And that's why over time, I learned to advise startups, if they can, when they're still very small and they look for that first design partner, actually choose somebody that is more medium-sized or even small, that you kind of do all the mistakes there, kind of get all the kinks in the system and kind of fix everything before you go to work with the big guys. And that's why we like so much that model with the kibbutzim, because in a way they can serve exactly to be these smaller guys. You can test with them, they move very quickly, you can do the mistakes with them, you can learn with them, and only then after you proved it with the kibbutz, you get the stamp of approval, the kibbutz approved it works well, Israeli agricultural works, then you can go abroad to the big players. So that's part of the model we are kind of promoting.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I think it's really one of a kind, and you've definitely found a niche with FLORA VC. Shifting a little bit toward Israel. So, me personally working also in the agri-food ecosystem, I keep seeing some of the most genius startups coming out of Israel. I mean, especially in produce, you said the drip irrigation, but even more recently, there's been some interesting SaaS solutions and, all different types of things. What do you think makes Israel so unique that it's generating such, creative ideas and innovation, and it's like this breeding ground for great startups?
And I think there's a few things in the Israeli society that kind of make it quite, a hotbed for innovation in general. And then we can talk about specifically in food, in the agriculture kind of world. I mean, I think one is, everybody goes to the military at a young age. So the military serves at age 18 is a very almost like an HR department. The one people like to say it's the biggest HR department in the world because it takes every child at age 18, boy or girl, and finds them the right role for their skill set. And a lot of people get a lot of skill sets, leadership authority, or technical capabilities that later on take into the civilian life. The second piece is in the agri-food tech space specifically, Israel is very interdisciplinary. So meaning, and it's also very small. So, there's a lot of theories around, kind of innovation hubs. If you look at, Silicon Valley, there's a reason why they're usually in condensed areas. So the same in Israel, we have that area of Tel Aviv, and there's this city outside of Tel Aviv called Rehovot. Not a very famous city, but it has the famous Weizmann Institute, which is like the MIT of Israel, has the Hebrew University Agriculture School. And that's where all the a lot of the food and agriculture companies are based. So on the other hand, also the universities are smaller and the professors are very entrepreneurial. A lot of the Israeli professors don't earn so well, so they actually think about how to build companies. And they like to collaborate. So you actually, in Israel, which is really typical than in other places, you would see a professor from material science talking with a professor from AI, talking with a professor from biotech, and together they'll build a company. In the US, I was just visiting MIT a few weeks ago for work, and the campus is so big, the chance that these three professors would even bump into each other in the coffee place is almost impossible. So in Israel, you have this kind of interdisciplinary approach between the different skill sets in academia that really, really help. That's one. The second piece that has been a big push to the Israeli agri-food tech ecosystem has been the Israeli government, which I'm not a big supporter of in general. Again, we won't go into politics today, but it's usually not very functional on most topics. Over the years, it's been very, very advanced compared to other countries in one topic, in building ecosystems. So what the Israeli government does, it has a special department called the Chief Innovation Officer or Israeli Innovation Authority. They change the name every few years, but bottom line, what they do is they identify 3 or 4 sectors that they believe that the next 5 to 10 years, Israel can become a leader, but they're still underdeveloped. And they start pumping money into those. They start building incubators, funding startups, and they fund that until that ecosystem is up and running by itself. And then they move on to the next one. So 10, 15 years ago, they did telecommunications, cyber, fintech. 2015, 16, they identified food and ag. And Israel was one of the first countries in the world to have some of those amazing agri-food tech incubators we have in Israel. We have the Kitchen Hub, we have Trend Lines, we have Fresh Start. So those were really part of building that ecosystem, kind of the governmental support. Today, I think they still do support, but I think we're soon reaching the point where we won't need that support. So I think that's been another point. And I think the last thing, which we did briefly talk about, is Israel is so strong in tech in general that today you're seeing more and more entrepreneurs and technologies shifting. And that's also part of our thesis in FLORA, moving from industry A into industry B. And for me, industry B is agri-food. So agri-food tech, as we said earlier, is so undigitized, so behind on many things, that actually, if you have an amazing set of entrepreneurs that build a big company we just started recently, we're looking at a company that did a really amazing job, the entrepreneurs in the fintech space. And now they want to take everything they did and do a new company that actually is completely redefining the world of commodity trading that I know you know very well, but I won't tell you because it's a competitor of your company. I don't know where they are. So, but anyway, just as an example. So that's really good examples of how people take know-how and skill set from A to B, and Israelis are very good in that. So those have been some of those examples, I think, that kind of really made the ecosystem thriving here.
Yeah, it sounds like the perfect recipe for success. I mean, the small space, the harsh environment. I haven't been to Israel, but you said, you're the experts in desert farming. I mean,
Correct.
making things grow in a sand is pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Mixed with the support from the government, mixed with this kind of rich cultural history of innovating and resiliency. I mean, it just sounds like the perfect kind of recipe for yeah, I guess success, really. And I mean, might be a really good segue to what's going on currently in Israel. I think everyone, me included, is burning to know from someone firsthand what is happening.
Sure. So, as we spoke about before, Israel is a small country, so the borders are very narrow from different directions. Unfortunately, obviously, we live in a tough neighborhood that historically has had a lot of problems over the years. But I think that for somebody that kind of grew up in Israel and seen a lot of things in the past, I think this one is a different one, and in the sense that this Saturday morning we all woke up for to kind of to be very honest, to a horror trip. We have a lot of villages and towns. By the way, most of them, most that have been the one that you hear all these horror stories are kibbutzim or moshavim. That are also agricultural villages. So some of them are even involved with us in the fund. So we know some of the folks.
My gosh.
And they are on the border with the Gaza Strip. And I think, as mentioned in the media, there was a surprise attack. And basically, we're talking about thousands. I mean, this is not usually they're like individual thousands of Hamas terrorists basically, shot rockets into Israel, and at the same time, basically broke the different parts of the fence and the walls that basically separate Gaza Strip to Israel. And some of those villages, you need to understand, some of these kibbutzim and villages are in the closest ones. The one in the line some of them are like basically a mile or two away from the border. So it's there's not a lot of distance. Those villages are prepared for extreme events, and they all have their own volunteering units, people that live there that serve in the military and can be called. But again, they are small villages, 50 to 300 families. And some of them have been attacked with hundreds of terrorists. Most of the families ran into every Israeli house has basically what we call basically a safety or security room that has stronger walls. Most of the families were told to move there because of the rockets and everything. These rooms are very hard to break into, so the terrorists most of them, they couldn't break in. So what they did, they started burning the houses. So the families had to leave because of the smoke. Otherwise, they would die from the smoke, and then they would kill them. I won't go into the graphic descriptions. I think it's probably not appropriate for this conversation. But I want to talk not about now, but let's look to the future. And this is very individual, so everybody has their own opinions.
Exactly.
I personally, I love Israel, but I think I'm a big believer that this is my personal opinion, of course. So that the only way in the long term for this region to survive is for people to find a way to live together and respect each other. And that would require a fundamental change from the day babies are born in this entire region, because there's so much hate. And I think that would be, we're not going to go away. And there's a Jewish state, and it's going to stay. And I think with the reality, our neighbors are also not going to go away. So I think it's a bit like we need to learn how to live together. But I think in the long term, we need to create a prosperous region. I'm hopeful that one day we were just on the verge of signing, hopefully, at least based on the media, a bigger peace agreement with Saudi Arabia that would have changed completely the region. I'm sure that's probably on hold at the moment, but hopefully that will come back one day. And hopefully, we can have a quieter conversation in a few months about this topic. But that's the reality. And I think for us as business leaders, we need to take care of our own ecosystems. And again, this is not the most urgent topic. There's people's lives at the moment much more important than startups, but it's important to say this affects everybody. I mean, just specifically in our topic of talking about agri-food tech, in one company in Israel in the agri-food tech space, a very known company called Amai Protein. It's a sugar reduction company, top tier company with top investors, one of their head of R&D was killed, a mother of two in the party. She was one of the party goers. She's dead. She had her funeral yesterday. There are huge amounts of people in those companies that were drafted into the military. I mean, another company, their CEO, I know two companies that their CEOs are in the military at the moment. The companies are still trying to work and show business as usual as much as they can. And, you know, the economy was tough already before around the world. This is going to have a huge financial impact on the entire region. So I feel like us as people in the industry, we need to take care of those companies. I mean, obviously we can't invest in all of them, but we need to find ways to support them, to mentor them, to give from our own time and network, because they're going to go through tough times. It was tough already, and it's going to be tougher now. And you worked in startups, you know how tough it is. So this is even worse. But you know, I think a bunch of us were talking in the Israeli ecosystem about partnering. We've been reaching out to all our peers, and actually, this is a great opportunity to say we have. You know, the biggest example of how I know that this is so different than everything else. Mm-hmm. Usually in the past, and I always used to work in international companies, I usually would get like a few emails. Some of them were kind of, hey, is everything okay? We heard there's a rocket. Hope you and your family okay. Some of them were genuine. Some of them were more kind of, you know, just to check the box. But you know, very appreciated. This time, I get like phone calls from people I went with to business school 15 years ago. I never even heard before. We have been bombarded in a positive way by so many friends from the industry, by the way. That's a great time to also thank people in this amazing agri-food tech industry, from large companies to VCs to startups from around the world saying, hey, we want to help. We want to support you guys. We're here. That gives a lot of strength. And, you know, we as an ecosystem are talking, you know, some of the folks that are in the VCs and how can we continue to help this? It's not the most urgent topic, but we still need to think about how do we rebuild everything we did, that it continues and flourishes once the day after.
Yeah, there's a lot of content there. One thing that keeps popping to mind, though, as you're speaking, is this word resiliency. And I think, you know, to me, if I look at the word Israel and ag tech, I just think about positive things. I just think about all the things we've been talking about in this podcast, right? Just wonderful people, smart, innovative startups. And, you know, how the question that keeps pumping in my mind is, how do we preserve that? Because you're literally, I mean, I just want to say this again, you're literally talking about, you know, people like you who have master's degrees, who are running companies, handling large sums of money. I mean, leaders and people who inspire youth, you know, inspire the global stage even, are getting drafted into war. And I think, you know, and God forbid, you know, their lives are at risk. They're just, you know, we can't sugarcoat that. As much as I want to say everyone's going to come home safely, it's all going to be fine. And you've got, like you said, CEOs of major companies getting pulled into war. And, you know, I think it's a huge loss for the globe to lose. If we lose, I'm not saying we're going to, you know, such a important player, especially for agriculture and ag tech and kind of, you know, because there's, you know, we're not even talking about the big problems, right? We've, you know, sustainability, food security, food safety, traceability, all of the big top data, you know, all the big topics we actually would talk about in a podcast like this.
Yeah.
You know, we're not even touching on them, but if we want to solve, you know, in Europe, some of these big things like how do we create a more sustainable food future?
Right.
Israel's pivotal in that, you know, and I just, so I just really want to highlight that from where I sit, there's a lot at risk, we can only hope that you guys will continue to be resilient, find ways, and you know, the irony of it all is you know, events like these are probably what make you guys so great. And
you know, unfortunately it's true. It's unfortunately true, and it's very true. And you know, it's amazing. As I said, I do these kind of, I every day go to a different military base to bring things, and you know, I actually pick it up from a neighbor of mine. He basically turned his house into a distribution center. And basically him and everybody in the neighborhood, and this is true in every neighborhood in Israel, so this is nothing special, they basically buy supplies from their own money. They basically have people in a different army base that says, hey, we're missing towels, whatever. Usually the military has all these things. It's just so many people and everything is happening so fast. And it's like, everybody's just joining the efforts. And like you said, rightfully, unfortunately, it's those kind of events that shape us and become so big. I mean, even by the way, and kind of always using the lens of Agri-Food is, as I mentioned, a lot of these kibbutzim that got hurt, these villages you heard mostly are kibbutzim or moshavim on the border. Some of them have dairy farms. So the cows were left there. They cannot be milked. I mean, I know it sounds like it's not the most important topic, but they actually have to be milked. Yeah. And we have an Agri-Food Tech WhatsApp in Israel for all the people that are active. And actually, they were looking for volunteers to go. This is quite a dangerous area, that know how to milk a cow. Because to come a few times a day to milk the cows so the cows can actually properly still live, because otherwise, I mean, somebody has to milk them. Even if the milk is grown, it doesn't matter. And people volunteer, then it's happening. So, I mean, it sounds like it's not the most important thing, but there's so many topics that get affected on a daily basis that just become very, and of course, I'm not even going into the mental health. I mean, there's a huge topic of mental health and psychologists. My cousin is a psychologist. They all stop taking care of their normal day-to-day patients and move now to the more urgent patients. So there's a lot of things happening in that lens. And also, we were supposed in Israel, and I'm sure you know about that, Israel has a beautiful celebration once a year that almost everybody in the industry likes to come, which is what is called Agri-Food Tech Week. It's every year in November. It's been going on for 10 years. It probably became, I think it's probably one of the 3 biggest events globally in the industry. It's a whole week. It has the big Food Tech IL conference that the Strauss Group with the kitchen does. It has a big event of AgriVest that Trendlines does with Green Soil and others, and hundreds of small events. That was supposed to be starting on the 6th of November, going on for a whole week, around 4,000 people. 80% of them are international. Every VC, every food company, every investor, startup was planning to come into town. Of course, that was canceled immediately. All these events were canceled. And I think that's also part of these things are important for the ecosystem, right? Because that brings everybody here. We can show them everything. We can interact with them. So I think, like you said, rightfully, that puts even more pressure on us as industry leaders to take care for the companies, entrepreneurs, people in our industry. And it's true for every industry. Everyone needs to take care of where they can help. And I think we're all doing it. I mean, we're talking with our partners abroad. We're volunteering our time. We do need to take care, like you said, in this beautiful miracle and prepare it also for the day after. Because also, it's not only about this, it's about the economy. Kind of people get jobs. If people have jobs, then they're better mental health. The economy is better. It's like a cycle. And by the way, it's not only for Israel, it's for the entire region.
Yeah, I was just speaking with someone from Sudan who had just recently fled and also had an agricultural business. And, he said something that really resonated with me. He said, no one speaks about the Sudanese conflict anymore. It's kind of out of the news and whatnot. And I guess it's kind of died down and it's calmer. But he said, it's not just a question of, is there war? Yes or no. It's a question of what quality of life do we have to go back to? And I think, these are the questions that, it's not at a point yet where, there's nothing to go back to. But that story about the dairy farm, I think it just shows to me how, the Israeli people are thinking about already, we're going to get over this, but those cows still need to be alive when we get to that point, because it's still our livelihood. It's still our, it's what makes Israel function. And I think it's a great anecdote because, when this does reside, you need a place to go back to, schools for your children to go to.
It's very, very sad. I mean, it's very, I have to say on a personal level, they've hardly ever been in my life events that I wake up in the morning and actually, we always have that twilight zone of the first 30 seconds or whatever between we were still asleep or awake before we start our day, that in the last week, every morning when I had that 30 seconds twilight zone, I actually asked myself, is that real? Or did I dream this? And again, we are very fortunate. Again, my immediate family, we didn't have any casualties. We have in the second circle, but still, we look at the television, we see these names. We all feel like their own children from our own families or elderly from our own families. And every family has somebody that they know a neighbor, cousin of a friend that got impacted one way or another. And unfortunately, this might, it's not the end yet.
Um, kind of pivoting a little bit, and I guess I'm still really curious. So when things subside, or maybe before this even happened, what are you going to go back to? I mean, what are you working on at the moment? What are some interesting projects? I mean, you just raised 2 rounds, I think, prior, right?
Yeah, so we
You made some investments. Go ahead. I'll give you the
Yeah, no, for sure. So first of all, so this is really important to say. So although it's kind of completely turbulent, I mean, this is very important for me also to say, for others, everybody's still also kind of holding up the fort, whoever's doing what. So also international investors that have startups and company in Israel, they're working, they're doing their best. The same as the VC, we're still operating. We're all just doing other jobs in addition that are not related to our own businesses connected to the situation. But people are still operating. We're still operating as a fund. We, as I always say, we're committed to the Israeli agri-food and European ecosystems, and we'll invest in both. We have some areas that we're very excited about. We actually just had a big competition that we were doing together with Planetech. Planetech is a large Israeli almost nonprofit that kind of supports the topic of climate change solutions, and they did a global search with us for startups in the space of nature-based solution and sustainable agriculture. And we got almost 90 submissions. Where actually, as we are speaking, we committed for the winner of that will minimum invest $1.2 million in one of those companies, and maybe we'll work with some others. So as we are speaking, we're screening those and trying to find the one we want to, or the few that we want to move forward with. So that's one space we're very excited about. And in general, we love that space of regenerative agriculture. We think it's a really interesting emerging space. There's still so many things happening there. Obviously, I don't think all the business models have been fully kind of optimized, but it's definitely an interesting space that we have a lot of interest in. We're very interested in the topics of the world, that actually where you come from, the world of fintech in agriculture and food. We think it's a fascinating area. We think there are some interesting companies, and you obviously know the space even better than me, but we think that's a really interesting space. That we're going to see some more and more interesting technologies and players coming into it around the procurement space, the fintech space, etc., commodity trading, etc. I personally love the space of food as medicine. I'm a big believer of the lines that are blurring between food, supplements, even over-the-counter drugs. Again, depends kind of on the regulation. And I think people at the end don't want to take medicine. They don't want to take everyday pill or powder. They actually want their food or their snacks to give them the nutrition and the health they need. We're starting to see new interesting business models, both in the digital end and the food end here. And we think we're going to see some more even entrepreneurs and companies moving that were more in the biotech pharma space, preferring to go to a space that is less regulated and requires less R&D into more food. So that's a space we're very passionate about. So those are some of the areas we're looking at. We love working with other ecosystems, like we both met at that amazing event in Germany. We love working with different European ecosystems. We're very active in the German ecosystem and the DACH region. We just started building our network. Gaia from our team that is in reserve, she just went to Scandinavia, so started building our kind of Scandinavian network. We love the UK and France, so we really like building that network, both from a deal flow perspective, but actually connecting between Israeli companies and even some of our LPs, as I talked about. We have the Kibbutzim, we really want to connect them. We also have another amazing LP, which is called Haifa Group, which is a global fertilizer player out of Israel, and we try to help them find solutions. So those are some of it, and we're still an early fund. We just started in February officially. We did our first closing in May for the fund, and we're still fundraising for it, but also starting to invest. And you rightfully said we did our first investment, which we're very proud about. It's a company, the collagen space. Thank you. It's always your first one is always the most important one. There's only one that is the first one, so we're very excited about that, and we're in due diligence on a few others. We'll probably do one more investment. I would have said 2, but I think we're moving now a bit slower, unfortunately, the next few weeks. We'll do for sure one more investment till the end of the year, and then next year we'll dial it up. And we're very active. We're looking at companies, we're talking, and again, for whoever listens for the podcast later on, if there's startups that are listening and we didn't talk with yet, please reach out. We're always happy to get to know you guys.
I'm so happy to hear that there's still some normalcy happening and projects are continuing while this is all going on. I think it just speaks to the resiliency of the Israeli people, and some of the projects you're working on are just absolutely exciting. I think you mentioned something really, really interesting, which is that kind of fusion we're seeing, these cross-sectoral fusions between finance and SureTech. I mean, all the way over to, traceable. It's just, there's so many different crossovers happening now. And I think this is one of the most thriving times, I agree, in this kind of agricultural innovation history. And so, yeah, I think you're just really highlighting that. You're living proof of that. Yeah, it's super fascinating. So we do have a lot of other startups in the industry or aspiring founders. Also, this podcast is meant to speak to youth out there, right? We do want to encourage more and more people to get into agriculture. One question, and I'm kind of curious about your answer. You're in touch with so many different parts of the food and ag space. Is there a problem that you'd like to see solved that currently isn't being solved? As in, where would you like to have a startup pop up that would catch your eye?
Love that. I love when somebody asks me a question I'm not prepared for. So that's a good one. I like it. Nice job. Nice job.
Thank you.
No, that's a good one. I think, I think it's an interesting one. As I mentioned before, the area which I'm, and I talk about it, I mentioned it in a few forums recently. I'm very interested in the space of food as medicine. So I just feel that there's a lot of conversation about it for probably the last 2-3 years. There's still hardly anything. So there are some companies that are kind of starting to do stuff, but I think I'm very keen to see some companies that are taking some of the maybe thinking that is used more in kind of healthcare and pharma, of efficacy, of kind of proving some of the functionality of what those kind of functional ingredients can do, maybe even having a digital component to it. Because I think what we need to be careful on, there's always a lot of snake oil, especially in the supplement side, just it's kind of deregulated. And a bit, we saw that in the big hype we had with CBD a few years ago. People felt they're going to take a CBD pill or something and they're going to have wings, which didn't happen. It only happens when you drink a Red Bull. I think is a space I would like to see that moving the needle. I would like to see some solutions that are with more efficacy, that have kind of more stringent R&D, maybe not going all the way to pharma, because that's not the idea, but actually building some real businesses that consumers can actually trust. And feel like, this can be something that can actually really fit my routine and have a real impact on me with benefit X or Y, etc., and have that validated. So that's a space I'm actively looking. So if anybody listens to or is trying to work on, please call me. We'll love to brainstorm with you. We're very, very interested in that space.
Awesome. No, you're giving me ideas, because I actually just had a podcast about, consumers changing their very intrinsic, generational desire to buy cheap food, right? Like, it's a consumer behavior.
Yeah.
And I think the question has to be, how do we remarket something we all take for granted, right? How do we rebrand food?
Yeah.
And I think what you're saying, and maybe this all kind of goes hand in hand, plays into that problem potentially.
Yeah.
So I agree. There's something there. Maybe we'll have to have another episode or offline conversation.
That's the episode after we have a piece in the Middle East. That's going to
be exactly. That's the plan. So yeah, no, I really appreciate it. And again, I would love to, we'll have to do another podcast where we really unpack more about how you invest and what you're looking for and strategies you have out there, and what projects you're working on more specifically. But for now, I'd like to just take the last couple minutes to give any last shout outs, but also share with the listeners how they can help support the conflict in Israel, and maybe also how they can support specifically agri-tech or agricultural communities. I mean, what you described with the rural Israeli communities, they're being hit the hardest, and these communities are, they're the ones creating the food, feeding the world. And how can listeners help?
No, absolutely. No, thank you. So, I mean, first of all, I think it's a great time to actually, first of all, say thank you. I think, and I'm saying this not only in my personal name, but I'm actually saying it, and I've spoken with so many friends in the industry and outside of the industry. There's been amazing, just so many friends in the industry have been calling and taking care of the entrepreneurs or VCs or their business partners. I think we're all grateful for that, and it does mean a lot. Even just getting a quick WhatsApp or short email, checking your fine really is very meaningful. So one, it's a great opportunity to say a big thank you. I think, and I actually just recently wrote a short LinkedIn post about it. I think there's a few things that people can do to assist in general in this situation. The first one is there's a lot of need for funding for some of these displaced families, for some of these families that lost their loved ones, for local communities. There are different nonprofits that raise money. My only caution would be make sure it's valid. That there, unfortunately, even in times of terrible times like now, there are some people that are doing some stuff to get money they shouldn't. So I think just make sure it's a credible organization. I put in my LinkedIn post a link that has a lot of other links of credible organizations. So I think that's one, or it could be also healthcare related. There's a bunch of them, so each person can find. There are ones that are saving animals that were left alone in those areas. So there's everything you can think of. That's really, I think that's a great way to help. That's one. I think the second one is continue to show love to your friends, family, colleagues you have in that region. Call them, show them you care about them. I think that means a lot for people. I would mention, and then specifically for our little universe of agri-food tech, I would really encourage the companies on the line that are listening to this, or the VCs. Obviously, no expectations for you guys, so you can't invest in everybody. I am also an investor. We need to be very selective. But given our, give a call to those startups, help them, open your network, open your heart, tell them where, give each one of them a pro bono of half an hour call. People need help, and it's a good time to show that kind of, that goodwill at this stage.
Amazing. No, I really appreciate you sharing that, and we'll be sure also to tag you in any posts and links and make sure that people can get in touch with you. I know you're a great source to kind of start spreading also and showing the right way to help. Like you said, you have posted some things on LinkedIn, the best places to help fund. Any final words, Gil, before we conclude?
No, I think this has been amazing. Super enjoyed it. Obviously, I would have been happy to have this in happier circumstances, but I'm grateful for you for giving this platform. And I think it's like everything in life, unfortunately, only in tough times we know how to appreciate the good things we have. And again, I know I said this before, but I'm a big believer of this. We really have an amazing ecosystem in this industry. I don't think all of the other industries have that. People know how to help each other. It's a place that people know how to collaborate, even if they're in competing places, that they do a lot of competition and know how to work together. This is a great place to also celebrate that. And I think that's something we all as industry players should also keep that and maintain that, because that's what makes this industry so special.
I couldn't agree with you more. Thank you so much for joining today, Gil. All the best.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, and honestly, I'm just so glad that we can support, and all the best to you and your family. I mean, these are hard times, waking up with that sense of fear. I can't imagine it. So again, my heart goes out to you guys, and hopefully we'll have this conversation again over a beer in Germany. That would
be amazing. Would love it. Or a hummus plate in Tel Aviv. Would love that.
Love it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. This podcast has been brought to you by Tridge, the leading global intelligence and networking platform for agriculture. Visit us at www.tridge.com to find out more.